Before we explore the life of Henry Box Brown, I want to give a special thanks to Healthy Mindset to you for sponsoring this video. I was lucky to receive one of their fantastic lifestyle anti-theft backpacks, and without a doubt, it's the best one I've ever had. They're super high quality and come with a ton of great features, such as USB and headphone ports, a 3-digit TSA combination, a suitcase strap, hidden pockets, and even reflective strips for night travel. I'd highly recommend buying one. Every bag purchased is delivered free of charge, and you get 30% off by using my discount code Forgotten Lives. For more information and access to their website, click the link below. Henry Brown was born on a plantation called Hermitage in Louisa County, Virginia, in 1815 or 1816. Little of his early life was recorded, except that he was enslaved from birth and details about his family. In his autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Henry Box Brown, written by himself, he mentioned having a brother and sister, as well as remembering his parents fondly. When he was 15 years old, he was sent to Richmond to work in a tobacco factory. Brown described his owner saying, "Our master was uncommonly kind, and as he moved about in his dignity, he seemed like a god to us. But notwithstanding his kindness, although he knew very well what superstitious notions we formed of him, he never made the least attempt to correct our erroneous impression, but rather seemed pleased with the reverential feelings which we entertained towards him." Brown's life was filled with unrewarded, hard labour, but he had it better than most of his enslaved peers. Since he was such a good worker, his owner, William Barrett, rewarded him with nice clothes and spending money. As a young man, Brown became friends with a woman called Nancy. Then they fell in love and got married. Together they had 3 children, all of whom were born enslaved due to the Partus principle. Brown lived together with his wife and children in a house that he rented, but this would soon change. Nancy and the children were owned by a Mr. Lee from an adjacent plantation, meaning their fate depended on this man. Brown didn't want to part ways with his wife or children, so he would pay his wife's master about $50 per annum so that he wouldn't sell his family. Unfortunately, Mr. Lee betrayed Brown. In August 1848, while Nancy was still pregnant with her 4th child, they were sold to a plantation in North Carolina. As usual, Brown left the house for work, but when he returned, no one was home. Upon hearing the news, Brown was destroyed. He had no way of saving them, and all he could do was weep for his family. Brown mourned the loss of his family for a few months. However, after this he became determined to escape slavery. As a young boy, his mother had instilled strong Christian values into him. Brown was a man of God, and with this faith, he plucked up the courage to devise a plan which would allow him to become a free man. Brown knew he wouldn't be able to complete this task alone, so he asked a fellow member of his church choir to aid him. His friend, James Anthony Smith, was a free African American and was more than willing to help. Following this, they got a white man called Samuel Alexander Smith to help them. Samuel Smith was a shoemaker and gambler who was sympathetic to the abolitionist cause. He agreed to the plan as long as he got some money in return. Brown's plan consisted of sending himself in a crate from Richmond to Philadelphia, as it had abolished slavery. His plan was of course very unique and creative, but at the same time extremely dangerous. In order for the plan to go ahead, Brown paid $86, almost $3,000 in today's money, to Samuel Smith. This was over half of his savings, but it was a risk he was willing to take. Smith then went to Philadelphia and spoke to members of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. The abolitionists he spoke to included James Miller McKim, William Still, and Cyrus Burleigh. These men advised him on how to successfully execute the escape plan. Smith was told to mail Brown to the office of Passmore Williamson. This was because Williamson was an abolitionist who was the secretary of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society and a member of its Vigilance Committee. In order for the escape to work, Brown first had to get out of work, so he painfully burnt his finger to the bone with sulfuric acid. The next day, on the 29th of March 1849, he got into his box, which was nailed closed by his accomplices. The box that Brown would travel in was sent as dry goods. No one would ever expect that a human would cram themselves into a tight crate that measured 3 feet long, 2 feet 7 inches deep, and 2 feet wide. The crate in which he travelled was lined with woolen cloth and baize to make things slightly less uncomfortable. There were only 3 small holes cut for air. Moreover, for nourishment he only had a small portion of water and a few biscuits. The box also indicated which way round it must be, with the words "this side up" having been written in large on the box. Despite this potentially dangerous journey for Brown, it was 100% worth it. He wrote, "If you have never been deprived of your liberty, as I was, you cannot realize the power of that hope of freedom, which was to me indeed an anchor to the soul, both sure and steadfast." Throughout the trip, Brown was transported in many different ways. His box was first transported on a wagon. After that, he travelled by train until his crate made it to the port. Following this, he was loaded onto a steamboat. Once this leg of the journey was complete, he was placed on another wagon, which took him to another train. On the last part of his journey, he was moved via ferry, railroad, and was finally delivered in a wagon after 27 hours of transportation. On the box were clear indications to workers that it should be handled with care, as well as which way up the box should be. Despite this, the crate was handled roughly many times and was frequently the wrong way around, but fortunately, Brown remained undetected. During one part of his 27-hour journey, Brown's box was the wrong way around for quite some time. Because of this, he thought that he might be on death's door. Brown wrote that he was resolved to conquer or die. I felt my eyes swelling as if they would burst from their sockets, and the veins of my temples were dreadfully distended with pressure of blood upon my head. However, luckily for Brown, 2 men looking for a place to sit saw the box, put it on the floor the correct way up, and sat on it. Brown said that it was due to this that he was thus relieved from a state of agony. The box with Brown inside was received by William Steele, James Miller McKinn, Williamson, and other members of the Philadelphia Vigilance Committee on March 30th, 1849. When the box was opened, Brown is noted to have said, "How do you do, gentlemen?" He then recited a psalm from the Bible, which impressed those men present. Brown's story was excellent. Many within abolitionist circles believed it would be great publicity for the movement, increasing its support. However, there was another point of view, which stated that if this escape path was made public, nobody else would be able to use the same method. Thus, it should stay a secret. The shoemaker who had aided Brown, Samuel Smith, attempted to earn money by shipping other slaves from Richmond to Philadelphia. However, on the 8th of May 1849, he was caught, arrested, and tried. Due to his actions, he was sentenced to 6.5 years in the state's penitentiary. James Smith, the free African American, found himself in a similar situation after being arrested on the 25th of September for a similar thing. Despite being tried, James Smith was fortunate to not receive any time behind bars, later being released. Brown's escape was celebrated for its creativity and was considered a modern postal miracle. Furthermore, it highlighted the improvement and increased communication between states via the government's postal service. This would go on to play an important role in the abolitionist movement. Although the South tried to control abolitionist literature, with the use of the postal service, they were no longer able to do so. Thousands of pamphlets, letters, and other materials reached the South. So, as long as privacy was respected, anyone could mail letters and packages with almost anything. This, of course, worried the slave-holding South. Despite differing opinions on whether to share Brown's story or not, he didn't want to keep it quiet. Brown was euphoric with the feeling of freedom and was extremely proud of his achievement. He soon became a symbol of the Underground Railroad freedom movement and used his incredible story to create a new life for himself. He then became a known speaker for the Anti-Slavery Society and got to know Frederick Douglass. In May 1849, he was nicknamed Box after he spoke before the New England Anti-Slave Society convention in Boston about enslaved people and their longing for freedom. In September 1849, he published his autobiography, The Narrative of Henry Box Brown, in Boston. It was written with the help of Charles Stearns. 2 years later, it was published in Manchester, England. The same year Brown emerged from his box, his family's new owner contacted him. Brown was offered the chance to buy his family, but for some reason he declined. Brown tried to keep this information private, but he was soon criticized over his finances and for not trying harder to get his family back. With his earnings from his book and lectures, Brown and his friend James Smith started a moving panorama called Henry Box Brown's Mirror of Slavery. During this time, moving panoramas were one of the most popular forms of entertainment, especially in the US and England. Brown's panorama was one of the first ones on the topic of slavery. It was presented in the US Northeast and lasted from April until August 1850. The Boston Daily Evening Traveler named it one of the finest panoramas now on exhibition. This all came to a sudden halt. This was due to the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. This law meant that Brown could be captured and again deprived of his freedom. As he was no longer safe in the US, he sailed for England in October. In England, he continued with his panorama, which lasted 10 years. After this, he branched out into other forms of entertainment, yet Brown always focused on the theme of slavery. Brown would perform several hundreds of times in a year, and it's said that his performances took him to every town in England. Brown even acted in several plays, but his acting career was short-lived. In the 1860s, he performed in shows as a magician under the names of Professor H. Box Brown and the African Prince. While he was in England, Brown married Jane Floyd, the daughter of a tin worker. They later had a daughter called Annie and a son, Edward. In 1875, Brown and his new family returned to the United States, where he continued to perform his magic act. One of his tricks involved climbing into the box that gave him his freedom. Brown continued to perform into his old age. His last performance is noted to have taken place in Brantford, Ontario, Canada, on the 26th of February, 1889. Despite no performance records having been found, certain documents, such as tax records, indicate that his performances continued into the early 1890s. It's thought that he died in Toronto on the 15th of June, 1897, aged 81 or 82. Thanks everyone for listening to this video on Henry Box Brown. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave me a like and a comment down below. If you're new, why not subscribe? That's all from me, so I'll see you all in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.